Two more Palestinians were shot to death today by Israeli troops as violent demonstrations continued in Israeli-occupied Arab territories. While in Moscow, where Secretary of State Schultz is conferring with Soviet leaders, the Soviet foreign minister said the Kremlin intends to play a more active role in Middle East negotiations. We have two reports, beginning with Dean Reynolds in Israel.
You could see a microcosm of the 10-week Palestinian street battle today near a cemetery in Nablus. A chanting crowd of rock-throwing protesters, enraged by the latest shooting deaths, confronts Israeli soldiers. For a time, the army just takes the abuse, but only for a time. In the chaos, a casualty is carried through the battle lines to an ambulance. Another tentative thrust by the army stalls in the face of at least one knife-wielding Palestinian and another carrying firebombs. A third charge. One protester is caught, and a day's worth of frustration pours from the Israeli troops. As does more rifle fire, a sound that draws neighborhood elders to the street to signal for a halt. Defiantly, the Palestinians move off. Standoffs like this have produced criticism of Israeli policy, but today Defense Minister Rabin reaffirmed his commitment to a forceful response.
Our policy is to meet violence by violence for the purpose of reducing the number of shootings.
Yet, as Secretary of State Schultz prepares to visit Israel, the policy seems to be having little effect. This is the 8th leaflet from the underground resistance movement that's directing much of the Palestinian unrest. It calls for a full week of demonstrations and strikes to mark the visit of Secretary Schultz. To stop the bloodshed, Schultz is pushing a U.S. peace plan that's divided the Israelis between those who would give up land for peace and those who would not. Prime Minister Shamir is cool to the American ideas, while Foreign Minister Perez welcomes them. To get the Palestinians to cooperate, there will likely have to be input from their allies, the Soviet Union. But that alliance troubles the Israelis.
I would never agree that any foreign country, Russia or another country, will make decisions instead of us or will try to force us to make a decision.
So the next question is whether the world's two superpowers can work well enough together to steer the combatants here off the street and toward the negotiating table. Dean Reynolds, ABC News in the Israeli-occupied West Bank.
This is John McWethy in Moscow. Secretary Schultz arrived this morning and plunged into a full day of talks with Foreign Minister Shevardnadze. On the way into those talks, Shevardnadze hinted that the Soviets want a larger piece of the action in any new peace efforts between Israel and its Arab neighbors. The U.S., of course, has just begun a delicate new initiative and wants the Soviets to stay away.
Of course. We want to play a more active role.
A more active Soviet role in actual negotiations?
Yes, also in the negotiations.
The U.S. argues that the Soviets should not get involved until the Kremlin establishes diplomatic relations with Israel. When the delegations actually sat down to talk, U.S. officials say Schultz, among other things, questioned Shevardnadze on Afghanistan. Soviet leader Gorbachev has pledged to withdraw Russia's 115,000 troops within 10 months. Schultz pressed for details, while the Soviets asked for assurances that the U.S. will cut off aid to the American-backed Mujahideen rebels. Negotiators spent much of the afternoon discussing human rights and arms control. And although no details were provided, spokesman Charles Redmond said both Schultz and Shevardnadze agreed.
The atmosphere was excellent throughout the talks today, that they were businesslike, and that both agreed that we were making good progress across the full range of issues.
Tomorrow, Schultz will meet with Soviet leader Gorbachev, a man who has repeatedly demonstrated in his dealings with the U.S. that he is full of surprises. Even George Schultz admits that facing Gorbachev is always a challenge. John McWethy, ABC News, Moscow.
It has been 5 days now since Marine Lieutenant Colonel William Higgins was kidnapped in southern Lebanon. And while there was an early hope that he might be turned up by search units, the episode is beginning to settle in to that all-too-familiar pattern of hostage-taking, complete today with invective aimed at the United States by the kidnappers. Details from John Lawrence.
Hezbollah, the pro-Iranian party of God, is now believed to be holding Colonel Higgins somewhere in South Lebanon. These Hezbollah militants marched today near Tyre, where the American Marine was kidnapped on Wednesday. Hezbollah released this Arabic-language statement in Beirut, expressing support for the kidnapping and warning of American retaliation. The great Satan, it said, referring to the United States, is preparing for an aggression full of hatred against our people here. The Hezbollah claim of an impending U.S. action was denied in Washington. Hezbollah's rival for control of southern Lebanon, the Shiite Muslim movement called Amal, continued its search today for the missing American. Amal's influence is strongest in the area south of the Litani River, a factor that could be crucial for Colonel Higgins, according to Daoud, the Amal commander.
If he is still in the south of Litani River, it is easy to seize him and release him.
Amal claims to have captured several members of the kidnap team, including a driver who said he was designated to drive Higgins to the north, but was not able to. A showdown between Amal and Hezbollah may be coming. The two Shiite groups exchanged rocket and machine gun fire in southern Lebanon early today, a confrontation brought about by the kidnapping of Colonel Higgins. John Lawrence, ABC News, London.
Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger sided today with President Reagan's original declaration that he would like to rescue Lieutenant Colonel Higgins. Kissinger said White House aides should not have taken it back. On Thursday, Mr. Reagan used the word rescue during a photo opportunity, but aides said later he didn't mean military action was contemplated. Kissinger said today he is uneasy that the word was withdrawn. I don't know why we should forswear the possibility of a rescue operation and not keep them guessing, he said.